This episode is sponsored by the Soul of Business Experience, a leadership community with curated resources for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their careers. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. Years ago, and I forget who it was that actually introduced this concept to me, and it's one that's well known today, but essentially the concept was this, that the world revolves around stories. Yeah, life is a story that's unfolding. People, from a relational standpoint, build relationships on stories, either past stories or future stories, what could be that sort of a thing. And stories are how the brain works. I mean, my mind is always telling me a story about what's happened, the meaning generation process creates all kinds of stuff that I get to live into or out of. All of that stuff comes into play here. And I got, my undergraduate work was in marketing, and I went to marketing and international business. And I remember a professor that I had when I was going to university in the Netherlands for some of my undergraduate work, talking about as we were embarking on this real long junket around the Europe, the precursor to the EU at the time. And one of the places we visited was the World Court in Strasbourg. And, we're not, 20 years old, 21-year-old students, and we got to sit in this big fancy room with big cigars and cognac, and I mean it was they did it really quite nicely for us. And the story that was left with me about the nature of business, the nature of life, the nature of the privilege, the nature of, and you can kind of fill in the blank, provided a way for me to begin thinking about what is the real true purpose of what we do in life. Now, this is really esoteric, but that actually was kind of a catalyst for me. And it was rooted in storytelling. It was rooted in the stories that we told each other around the campfire afterwards, and those sorts of things. So I'm mentioning all of that as a kind of a precursor here. Every organization has a soul. The title of this podcast is The Soul of Business. The soul represents the blueprint of what could be. Everything has a soul. Everything has a blueprint that looks for its full expression. The tree out in front of my office here, it started out as a seed that held a blueprint of what it could become. And now I've got this magnificent fir on the bank overlooking this ocean. So that blueprint is a story. That blueprint is a story that seeks to be nurtured and watered and fed, and it unfolds in an appropriate amount of time. My guest today, and I'm absolutely thrilled about this, Neal Foard, is in a past life was the worldwide head of creative learning for Saatchi Saatchi, one of the foremost advertising brands in the country, or in the world, actually. And he was for many years the executive creative director in both New York and their Hong Kong offices. And he's worked with ad campaigns with clients all over the world, some of the most well-known on the planet today. And the fundamental message that he actually organizes around is that small intentional acts of care can shift business outcomes. And effective communication starts with stories that are rooted in truth. There's a resonance to the story that people actually, I'll use this word here, they actually vibrate with. There's a frequency to it. And that can cause a lot of movement. So the soul of business is about making sure that what you're doing from a business perspective is touching people. And this goes back to my whole point around what is the purpose of business. Purpose of business is to uplift the experience of being alive on the planet. And if you're doing a good job of that, you're going to probably make some money. Uplift the experience of being alive on the planet. There's resonance in that. So Neal, I want to welcome you to the show. Folks, Neal Foard, welcome to the show.
I appreciate that, Blaine. What you were introducing is the purpose of business. That is not a widely held belief in our culture, sadly.
No.
The question my own father used to say was, he goes, do human beings exist to serve business, or does business exist to serve human beings? And just now it's quite neck and neck, depending on who you speak to. And that's sad to me. We are on a journey. To go to your theme of storytelling, there's this wonderful author. He wrote *Sapiens*, Yuval Harari.
Oh, yeah.
And his frequent refrain was that the most important stories we tell are the ones we tell ourselves about ourselves. And this is kind of the evangel that I'm preaching lately, is that it's really important. Have you ever heard this phrase, be careful what you say, you're listening?
I have heard that.
You have to give yourself supportive language. You have to treat yourself with sufficient respect and compassion to allow your story to evolve organically, to follow what your conscience tells you to do, and try to find your happiness in the agreement between your spirit and the way you treat other people. And there is you and I are both of sort of an age cohort where we've been around the business world long enough to not be quite so interested in getting the latest promotion or trying to meet a sales goal, this quarter. And with that distance comes a kind of an appreciation for what it all adds up to, and if it's going to have any meaning, what meaning should it have? And that's where I am of a mind that business exists in order to improve the lives of human beings. And to the extent that it fights that purpose, it is in disalignment with the world.
Yeah.
And so that's partly why I'm ecstatic to be on this show, Blaine, because I feel like you and I are going to be singing a harmony when it comes to the purpose of business and how to conduct it in a way that you'll be happy with in the mirror when you're 70.
Well, this is, when I wrote the book Compassionate Capitalism, it was very much organized around that whole notion that we've just been exploring here. The idea of happiness, I came across this phrase the other day. Happiness is cause, not effect. So
yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah, it stopped me too. So when I read it, I went, happiness is cause, not effect. Because people, in a lot of the coaching work that I do with executives, happiness will come into play every now and then. I just want to be happy. And it's like I've got to go outside of myself to search for it. And to your point, that inner talking, most people don't pay attention to the inner conversation, but it's incessant. There's always a conversation that's going on in my mind in some way, shape, or form. Most of it is, subcutaneous in one sense. I'll say in the sense it's below the skin, it's below the consciousness. In the work that when we were in the green room before we went live here, you were talking about some research that you just came across.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
So yeah, what we were talking about, ladies and gents, was a gland, if you will, in the human brain called the habenula. And it is a kind of distributor of dopamine depending on how it perceives your likelihood of survival given certain behaviors. So for example, when it confronts danger, the habenula wants to discourage you from taking unnecessary risks, and it wants to reward you for your survival. This, in an environment where we are not nearly in the danger that we once were in the days of the saber-toothed tiger, we are finding that our media tries to keep us in a perpetual state of feeling as though we are under threat. This is how they engage your attention. This is how they hold it. And under these circumstances, your brain and your physiology gets exhausted by the habenula as it tries to reward you perpetually to stay locked indoors and simply get its dopamine, not from the distribution of the normal activities of normal stress and normal physical activities, but rather, it will distribute dopamine from the constant stimulation of the algorithm as it feeds you more rage baiting, more threats, and so on. Well, they're discovering through the study of this habenula that there are ways to regulate it so that you don't perpetually feel under threat and that you respond to the world realistically meaning you have an appropriate sense of caution, but not a disproportionate feeling that you are being assaulted on all sides by this or that group and so on. And, can I tell you a story, Blaine, about an experience that I had very early in my career? I was late in my career. I got sort of jazz famous for putting on good presentations, but early in my career, I was quite bad, quite awful. And this was the stimulus to get better, And they put me in front of an audience of about 200 clients in the Drake Hotel in Chicago. And I just botched it. I mean, it was I had one of those out-of-body experiences where I was watching myself fail. And I couldn't get out of my head, and it was those embarrassing pauses while the machine tries to reset. And at the end of this debacle, I felt certain I was going to be fired. Like I would not have a job the following day. So you can imagine how hard it was to fall asleep that night. And I, round about 1:30 in the morning, I said, well, the hell with this. There's no way I'm going to get to sleep. Let me see if the bar is still open. So I wandered downstairs into the bar, only to discover that there's nobody there except the lights are on and there's a woman behind there smoking a cigarette. This is back when you could smoke in bars. And she's back there and she's got this look about her behind, like tough, like she fought she put on a shipyard strike against the Soviets in the 80s, like that kind of tough. And
image, yeah.
So she sees me coming. She takes a big long drag off a cigarette, blows, gets a measure of me through the smoke. I order a gin and tonic and she goes, yes, you could have something dull and unremarkable, or you could have the best vodka in the world. Up to you. So I go, well, I'll have the best vodka in the world. She says, do you mind? It's slightly illegal. And I go, what? And she says, it has a blade of grass in it from Poland, and this makes the customs people wet the beds. So I go, yeah, no, it's okay. And she goes, okay, good. So she pulls out 2 glasses, one for herself and one for me, and pours us about 4 fingers apiece. Okay. And then as she's pouring, I noticed that she's got written on her hands some kind of phrase in Polish. And it honestly looks like something you gave yourself in prison, And so I say, what does that say on your hand? And she goes, 20,000 years ago, odds are good. You get killed by a tiger or bear, or you fall through the ice, And we survive because our ancestors learned to freak out about danger. Everything was tried to kill you. But now, we have a bad meeting. We freak out, even though, nobody's going to die. Okay. So she says, it says, nie ma tigrisa. There is no tiger. And I look at her and I'm thinking like, holy shit, this was just for me.
Yeah.
And I go, I think you are the greatest bartender in the city of Chicago. And she takes a big drag. Goes, you may applaud. Now, it turns out she was not an employee of the hotel. She was a guest just like me. She'd come down. All the liquor was locked up, but the bootleg Zabrovka was under the sink. So that's what she found.
My God.
So she served that. Now, what I love about that is it sort of took her, it was everything about the delivery for me, which is like, brother, I've seen much worse. Okay, than your meltdown this morning. I wouldn't worry about it. Okay. Nobody dies, comrade. So, this was the story in many ways that sort of changes your life. Because now if I just told you, Blaine, hey, don't be so worried about it. Nobody dies. That's one way of taking in the information. But this was a lifelong, I internalized it. I got it. I accepted it. I constantly say it. So I told this story in social media. I told it on TikTok and Instagram. And people started sending me photographs of the tattoos they had gotten with that phrase on it.
Really?
And that was kind of life-changing too, because I thought, oh, that really mattered to some people. That little tale it really resonated with some people. But it makes sense, doesn't it? Because the same effect that it had on me, it had on other people, which again, of course, that's the only lot. Of course it would affect other people. It affected you. What, you think you're special? We're all on a journey, brother. We're all on the same journey.
Yeah.
And these little bits of wisdom became sort of my factory setting. I would just try to spread these things. And there's something else too, which is I found that there's no reason to leave anybody with a message except that there's hope for us. Like, why would I want to contribute to this deluge of rage baiting and division and conflict and making everything your problem? And that sort of now let's go back to what you said before. Happiness is the cause, not the effect. So if you spread the message of hope and joy and togetherness and not division and not rage baiting, but a little encouragement, and a little feeling like, hey, it's okay. We're going to make it. This isn't the worst we've been through. That's the cause of the effect. And so I find that I am happiest in that moment when I post these things. And then the following morning, I'm like, like that. Cause I feel like it's not that I'm looking for the reaction. It's just that I know there's going to be a reaction. And to sort of put a bow on it, I love to send letters to my friends and like in the post. And I love to send boxes. And if you've ever had the experience of ordering something that you really wanted and now it's in the mail, you know it's coming, and you have that Christmas Eve sensation, it's coming. It's better when you're on the other end of it and you know it's out there on its way to somebody else. And I'm finding that this, to return to your central thesis of compassion capitalism, or the idea that, when you conduct business a certain way, joy is a dividend as much as the quarterly earnings. And when you send a parcel or you send a letter, you've caused yourself joy and happiness.
The idea of generosity starts to creep in here. Yeah. And I do firmly believe that there's a generosity effect that, it's a ripple consequence.
Yeah.
And
that's been demonstrated for sure.
Yeah. So from a business perspective, from a leadership perspective, from a human being living perspective, the idea of giving things away, a couple of things come into play with that. One is it's an acknowledgement, and this is the story that gets told in my mind when I'm giving something away. It's an abundant universe. I have enough. I have more than enough in order to be able to give this away, whatever this might be. And it also, if we get into some Buddhistic philosophy here, if I'm giving something away, by definition is, I'm not attached to the thing. And
that's a great observation. Yeah.
And that lack of attachment allows for a free flow of experience to come into play here.
There's that phrase where they say that a candle is never dimmed when it lights another candle. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You were just
that's Actually, the candle metaphor was where I was going to go with that.
Oh, well, there you go. You and I are brothers by another mother. Can I tell you another thing this is another thing that I'm always spreading wherever I go. And that is that so I had this experience. So there's a very, very fine restaurant down at the base of our hill. It's called the Terranea Resort. Really super deluxe. Okay. And on the advice of somebody a long time ago, they said, look, if you're going to pay $6 for a coffee at Starbucks, you might as well pay $11 for a coffee at Terranea, and because they have the view. And you're hanging out with the groove meisters and everybody's good looking, So it's like, that makes sense to me. So I was down there and this is what I was seeing. I was at a table. There were these two very attractive women in their 40s, and they were having this conversation. And one of them was complaining about her ex-husband. And she was, she was really taking him to task, and she was referring to him as a dog, and that all men were dogs. And I sat there and I thought, I'm not a dog, but if I was a dog and I could hire an attorney, I would sue you for slander, because you're saying that like it's a bad thing to be a dog, when I know a lot of people who prefer dogs to people. And I mean, not that a dog doesn't come with its drawbacks. I mean, for example, you have to walk them all the time. You have to pick up their poop. You have to constantly take them to the vet, which is very expensive, and they shed on everything and they chew stuff up and they attack the cats, and God help you if they bite someone. So with all these drawbacks and all this sacrifice, then after years, they die. And there is a very good possibility that will be among the saddest days of your life. So The question is, why do people bother? Why do people love dogs so much? And the answer I have is because dogs love you first. They don't wait, and they don't judge you, and they're always happy to see you. And my favorite thing about them is that they never look at you and wonder if they could have done better. And if you think about the way that dogs approach it, they throw it out there with no expectation of reciprocity. They can't help themselves, frankly. They want to be friends. And this is what I think people love most about them, is that voluntary, they're not cautious. Some are, but you know what I mean. In general, they really want to be friends unless they've been abused. So as a person, especially as a leader, if you have that kind of, you're going to have to prove to me that you're not worth my time, as opposed to prove to me you're worth my time. When a leader goes into the world like that, what he or she does is she signals to the entire organization that this is how we are.
Yep.
That this is how we are. And whether it's a sports franchise, I often think that winning sports cultures are often misunderstood. When you look at, what was the name of the coach of the Bulls for all those years, who was, who I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson, they did not nearly appreciate the level of sophistication of that man.
He was amazing.
An amazing, philosophical, deeply understanding, compassionate, psychological. Who was the coach of the Mavericks for years and years? No, I don't know whether the Spurs or the Mavericks. The Spurs, Antonovich, what's his name? You'll forgive me. Your guests are killing themselves right now over my inability to recall. Greg Popovich.
Okay.
Again, Popovich was famous for his great relationships with the players and how much they loved him for the care and the dedication and his concern for his players. He was never afraid to backstop them to the owner. He was never afraid to take their side in any argument against the league. He was famous for this loyalty and this care and this love. And there have been NFL coaches, same thing, deeply emotional people who they're like Super Bowl winners. And most of the time we think of a guy like, say, coach of the Pats, winningest coach of all time in the NFL, 7 Super Bowls.
Lombardi.
No, I'm thinking of the coach of the Patriots, not the Packers.
Bill Belichick.
Yeah, so Belichick is sort of legendarily truculent.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think he's the model. I think when you look at a guy like John Madden or like...
I'm going to bring Pete Carroll into the conversation.
Yeah, okay. Pete Carroll's he is prototypical, deeply emotional man, cares so much about the human beings on the other side of the pads. When he was at USC, oh my God, he used to do so much community outreach. He was very famous for his involvement with the community. When you look at Dan, who am I thinking of? Dan MCDC up there in Detroit, a deeply emotional coach, Dan Campbell.
Yeah.
Very, very emotionally invested in his players, emotionally. And it takes, he gets this close to tears every time they lose, but not for his sake. It's for the city and for the owner and for the players. He's just crestfallen that they fought so hard and they didn't quite, and he blames himself all the time. Okay. What does all this add up to? In an environment, a savage winner-take-all environment of the NFL or in the NBA, it is these coaches that really care about their players. You'll see more examples of those than the heartless, cruel taskmasters who beat up on their players, because a human being is subject to wanting to win or really wanting to win. Where those guys that play for Dan Campbell, there's a reason they were all injured at the end of the season. I mean, they were badly injured because they were hurling themselves into the danger for that man.
Yeah.
Like,
I will walk on fire for you.
Yes, exactly. And it's a demonstration of when a leader is compassionate, not a douche, but a compassionate, caring human being, their people will really go out of their way to meet the targets that get set for them.
Well,
and
what's interesting about that is, that's sort of a behavior, that's sort of a characteristic. I'm going to kind of put this back in your ballpark here. The story that gets told by the players in this case about who that person is, what they care about, where I am in the pecking order, I mean, all of that stuff. So people want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be recognized. They want to feel as if they have agency in their life. The sort of coach that you're describing there basically provides a contextual frame for those sorts of attributes to be realized.
Yeah.
And the story that comes into play with this.
The story they tell with their behavior is it's very easy to understand. Any organization, particularly a big organization, or say the United States Navy, or, where the Navy cannot afford not to develop leaders on an ongoing basis. They absolutely must have the next gen ready to go. And in their system, they have, the chief petty officers.
Mm-hmm.
And chief petty officers have a very interesting remit. Their province is, you are not judged exclusively on the efficiency of the young men under your care. You're going to be judged on on how well you have developed the next class of officers. Because the ensigns that board that vessel, even though technically they outrank the chief petty, you have to be absolutely brain dead as an ensign not to listen to every word that comes out of that CPO's mouth and observe it as though it is the revealed word of God. And as a result, the CPOs and the master chiefs, they live a life of astonishing respect on that ship. Like real legit respect. In fact, I don't know whether it was Rickover or Nimitz, one of the true giants of U.S. naval history, said that, make no mistake, the Navy is the chief petty officers. That they determine the absolute destiny of this corps is how well they do. And he said that the smartest and most brilliant officer he ever met was a chief petty officer that made him what he was. Now, if you look at that, you think about, imagine what a difficult task it is to be technically outranked and yet have to carve and chisel and sculpt these young men and women to be fine officers.
Mm-hmm.
That is not an easy task. It requires a kind of equipoise.
Yeah,
you can push only what?
Great word.
Yeah. Equipoise, as I understand it, is that it's like a downhill skier where they are on the ragged edge of disaster at every moment, but they are also completely relaxed.
Yeah. There's
flexing and perfectly focused, but completely letting the environment buttress and batter them and then accommodate. Now, a chief petty officer to me is kind of the ultimate expression of leadership, because like a good father or mother, or like an older brother or sister, they can't force this on you. They've got to pull it out of you. They have to be a leader. They have to, in many ways, I would suggest that a great book that needs to be written, it's probably already written, is The Chief Petty Officer's Guide to Being a CEO. Because do you seriously think that the United States Navy is a, woo-woo organization? that believes in touchy-feely. No, man, it is a stern, unforgiving environment. There are 5,000 ways to die on an aircraft carrier. Right? I've been aboard. Everything's trying to kill you. The machinery's trying to kill you. What's that?
Do not stand in front of the catapult.
Yeah. Oh my God, the blast shields, the tossing seas, your life is in the hands of that guy with the paddles.
Yeah.
Watching those lights, and they're calling the ball, and those guys, and they don't let those people do it until they've flown those missions. It's very unforgiving. And an aircraft carrier, a minesweeper, whatever it is, the ocean is trying to kill you.
Yeah.
Therefore, I would guess that whoever is educating and training and developing the CPOs ought to teach a course on how to be a CEO, because what they'll do is they're going to, yes, of course, they're worried about the quarterly results, but what they're really worried about is the next class of officers.
That's true. That's the leaders that are not focused on developing the bench, so to speak, are not going to succeed in life. And they're certainly not going to succeed in their career long term.
Yeah, and this is the tragedy of the Chicago School of Economics, sort of what's the next quarter's results, because you know how it goes. Do you know I think the life expectancy of a CMO, like a chief marketing officer, is like 18 months.
18 months now, yeah.
Like that, you can't do crap in 18 months.
Yeah, CEO now I think is about 3 years.
Okay, which means, and they know that, which means they don't really have any intention of going past 36 months. It's like They're financing this car and then they're out of here.
Yeah.
And under those conditions, their priority is really not who they're leaving behind.
No, it's not. It's bumping the stock price because that's where they're going to be. Their compensation is in the value of the stock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and it's quite sad, and it's sad for a variety of reasons. But I believe it's a betrayal of the social contract. And if you go back into history, you can go back to before the French Revolution. You can go back to the Romans, the Etruscans. You can go back to the Chinese when they're creating agriculture. When you go back, there is always a social contract of some form or another, an agreement that this far and no farther. You can push me only so far before things turn violent. And there was this phrase that the French aristocracy used to use, which was noblesse oblige. If you're going to be given the status of the aristocracy or, the bourgeoisie, you have an obligation to those people in your care from whom you draw the taxes and the revenues.
Yeah.
If you do not live up to your noblesse oblige, your obligation, you will wind up on the other side of a guillotine. And I believe that the current cycle is not built with any sense of noblesse oblige.
I would concur with that in just about any way I could. As we're coming to a close here, but I do want to be sure that I touch on this because I want people to find a little bit more out about you. You've got an organization. You're the founder of something called Storyfire, where you teach the persuasive storytelling. You want to talk a little bit about Storyfire?
Yeah. So what I discovered when I was in my career in advertising, I wound up, and I counted it up. I gave thousands of presentations. And in those thousands of presentations, it was often, what I learned was that the best results were always attached to a story, meaning the best way to explain an idea, the best way to make a sale, the best way to be remembered, the best way to be appreciated and liked, the best way to establish a relationship is through stories. So, for example, as I was saying before, when I was telling you that story about, going down to the bar at 1 a.m. and, Nyama tigrisa, there is no tiger, that this is so much more efficient at getting a point across in a way that the other person understands and internalizes. My guess is 3 months from now, if somebody asked you to repeat that story, you could get pretty close. You're not going to remember the Polish, but you remember the story. And what's more, you'll remember sort of there is no tiger. And why that's important is in any organization, in order to make a sale, you don't make the sale with the person you're talking to. They have to sell it within their own walls. They have to justify their decision. They have to defend it. When you tell a story, you arm them with the talking points. They can go into their own building, repeat the sale again as if you were there. And that was a great learning for me. It's it's so much more profitable to just acknowledge that stories are the default setting of human beings. It's how we remember information. It's how we internalize the emotions and how we felt about something. It's how we remember something well enough to repeat it and spread the meme. And I thought, it would be, I wish somebody had done this for me. I wish somebody had taken 30 years of distilled experience making thousands of these presentations and have taught me that when I was 25 years old. So that's what this is. It's a multi video series. They're bite-sized. They're about 6 minutes a piece, and they always focus on one point at a time. But essentially, it's like, look, if you want to be memorable, and if you want to be effective in all versions of sales and persuasion, whether you are a lawyer or whether you are in advertising or whether you are a CPO aboard a ship, the best way to do this is by telling people stories that they can repeat. And I'm quite happy with it. Normally, I wouldn't grind my axe and say, well, this is for sale and it's at $9.99. It's no. I really am quite proud of this. I better be. It's my entire. Here it is. I've vomited it all up.
Here's my portfolio.
But they can find it, actually. It's pretty easy to find. By the way, the name Storyfire comes from telling stories around the fire. And so it's easy in one sense. It's storyfire.net. The hard part is it's not .com. It's .net.
.net.
So,
.net.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are
Folks,
little videos on there that'll give you samples of it. And
yeah, I
just
poked around a little bit, so
good.
it's
Right on.
intriguing. It is. It's worth exploring. So storyfire.net
Yes.
is
Thank you for that,
where you
Blaine.
find out more about Neal. Neal Foard is the guest today. Soul of Business with Neal Foard. As always, I'm going to just kind of sign off with a little story myself. Yeah, I grew up on a farm, and I used to wander the forest, which was butted up right next to our farm. And when I was a kid, I was always fascinated by seasons. Just kind of the ebb and the flow of kind of how things worked. And all of a sudden, that bare ground that was covered with snow now has a whole bunch of grass in it that I got to mow. What happened? Well, seasonality took place, and the stuff that died served as compost for the stuff that grew. The point being that everything in nature serves in some way, shape, or form as a center of distribution. There's nothing in nature long-term that serves as a center of accumulation. Everything in nature serves as a source and a center of distribution. So you are a part of nature. Each one of us is. So the admonition here is go out today, go out tomorrow, go out this week, and act as if you're a part of nature. Find something to be distributed, whether it's a hug, a smile, tip the bill, whatever it might be, but act as if you are a center of distribution. I think you will be delightfully surprised at what happens when you're doing so. Thank you for listening. This is The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett, and I will see you on the next episode. And Neal Foard, thank you very much. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, it has been. Take care, Blaine. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. This episode is sponsored by the Soul of Business Experience, a leadership community with curated resources for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their careers. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks.